أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين وأصحابه المنتجبين. أما بعد. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Sociologists say that as human beings, we are social animals. We interact with one another in different capacities, and we experience various different types of relationships in our day-to-day lives, whether that be within our family circle. So, for example, the relationship between a father and a son, or between a husband and a wife. Each of these relationships has its own unique qualities and characteristics. And therefore, because of these unique different types of relationships that we experience, each has been governed by certain rights that I hold and certain rights that the other party holds against me. And therefore, we see that lots of different societies, nations, and organizations have tried to establish different rights for people on a global level. So, for example, the United Nations in 1948 made the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And within this, they tried to highlight rights for different individuals, regardless of their religion, regardless of their race, regardless of even where they come from or where they live in the world. And so these rights, for example, include the freedom of the right to practice and believe what you want to, the right to equality, or for example, the principle of innocence until proven guilty. All of these rights are included within this declaration. Now, within the Islamic world, one of the most unique contributions to the discussion of rights has been presented and attributed to the fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullah salamu alayh. In his Risalat al-Hukuk, which is also known as the Treatise of Rights. And within this, the Imam does a unique job in that not only does he present, for example, the rights that God has on me, but he also presents the rights of oneself in relation to, for example, the different body parts. So, for example, the rights of the eye, the rights of the hand, the rights of the stomach. And then he goes on to speak about the rights of different acts. So, for example, the rights of prayer, the rights of Hajj. And then he moves on to speak about different rights of relations and the relationships that we have within the family setup and also outside of that. So, for example, he speaks about the rights of the mother, the rights of the father, the wife, the one who seeks advice from us, and even people, for example, who are older than us or people that are younger than us. So you see that this Risalat al-Hukuk is all-encompassing. And today I wanted to focus on a particular right attributed to the Imam, which is the rights of the one who does evil unto you. And I think in today's climate, this is relevant especially. And we see that the advice given by the Imam on this specific issue is so succinct and yet is powerful and eloquent. What does the Imam say? He says that the right of the one who does evil unto you is that you pardon him. And then if by pardoning that individual it causes harm unto him, then you can defend yourself. So you see that the Imam, even when someone wants to do harm unto them, even when someone wants to do harm on the holy household, they want to pardon that individual. They act in this spirit. And then we need to now reflect and say to ourselves that would we act in such a way? If someone wanted to even anger or humiliate or swear at us, we act so aggressively, let alone if someone wants to do evil unto us, let alone if someone wants to harm us. So we see that even in our day-to-day lives, as soon as someone swears at me, for example, I'm ready to give 10 swears back. I'm ready to retaliate in such a way that I want to get the better of that individual. But the family of the Prophet, salawatullah salamu alayhi, they didn't act in this way. They didn't act in this manner. And this was the seerah and the legacy that they left behind. And we can see this not only reflected in their words, but also in their actions. So when, for example, we look at famous stories, we all know these stories, by the way. When we look at famous historical narratives, for example, I looked at Tariq al-Tabari and also a scholar by the name of Sir John Glubb, who narrated on the incident of Siffin. And when they were talking about this incident of Siffin, the Battle of Siffin, they say that Muawiyah's forces reached the battlefield first. They're the first ones to get to the point of battle. And because they have that strategic advantage now of getting there first, they try to cut off the water supply to the Imam's army. So they set up camp at the base of the river Euphrates, and they want to cut the Imam's army off from the water supply. So when the Imam's army arrives, they've been traveling, they're thirsty, they're in the heat of the desert in Sham. Imagine this. They get there, and the Imam says to them, go and look for other sources of water. So they go, they have a look around, they can't find anything, and they return to the Imam and say, there's no sources of water. The only source is behind the army of Muawiyah. So the Imam is resorted to having to fight this army. So his army go out now. They are in the heat of the battlefield, they're fighting hard. They get there, and eventually they win victory at the riverbank and get access to the water. Now imagine you've been in this situation, that you're thirsty, you're tired, and you're in the situation where you've been oppressed, your rights have been taken. So now you have the upper hand. What would you do? Let's see what the Imam's companions do. The Imam's companions, they say to each other that, I swear that I won't give that army now that we have control of the water, I won't give them even a drop of water. This is what the companions are saying. But what does the Imam reply to them? He says to them that in the same way that they did injustice to us and therefore Allah gave us victory over them, we shouldn't be unjust to them. So what does he do? He lets the army of Muawiyah through also and have access to the water. So we see this in the seerah and in the legacy of the Prophet and his holy household. And this is why when we look at, for example, sermons in Nahj al-Balagha and sayings of the Imam in Nahj al-Balagha, he backs this up. And he says that, for example, in one saying, that when you are empowered to vanquish your enemy, let your pardon of him act as thanks for having been given power over him. So this was the way of the household. Another narration says, Al-afwu zakatul dhafar. So this is what the Imam says in Nahj al-Balagha, Al-afwu zakatul dhafar. He's saying that pardon is the zakat of triumph. So when you have victory, the most blessed way to give thanks for that is to give zakat in the way of pardoning that individual. And therefore we see that pardon is a grace and a virtue that the Ahlul Bayt display in their day-to-day lives. And finally, what I wanted to mention was also we see this in prophetic traditions. So for example, Mullah Mahdi Naraqi in his Jami al-Sa'adat narrates a tradition to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he says, Al-afu la yazidul abdu illa izzan, fa'fu yu'izzukum Allah. So he's saying that, and I'm going to render this in my own words, so I ask my teachers to forgive me if I make a mistake here, but the forgiveness doesn't increase a servant, only increases in servant, in honor. So forgive others so that Allah may honor you. So this was the etiquette of the Prophet and his holy household, and we need to reflect upon ourselves that as soon as someone angers us, annoys us, how do we react? And this isn't even talking about those kind of people. This is talking about the people who want to harm us and want to cause evil unto us. Look at the conduct of the Prophet. Look at the way that they dealt with those people in this situation, and we need to reflect on this and take lesson in our day-to-day lives. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu s-salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqq, wa tawasaw bis sabr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulullah wa ala ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, in Surah Al-Hujurat, in verse number 10, He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse says, without doubt the believers are brothers of one another. So make peace and harmony between your brothers and have God consciousness, so that maybe Allah will show mercy to you. So before I begin, Surah Al-Hujurat is known as being a beautiful surah in the Quran in that it details many morals and ethics that we can work towards as Muslims. And therefore, because of this, many Mufassirun have given weight to this surah and have given their own commentaries and discussions on this surah. So today what I want to do is focus on the commentary by Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani in his book, The Islamic Moral System, in which he analyzes this verse. And I think it's relevant today because nowadays we see that there's a lot of disunity amongst our ummah in general, and we need to look at these verses and reflect upon them so that we can help our current situation. So Ayatollah Subhani, he breaks this verse down and analyzes it in certain perspectives. So first of all, when you look at the verse, Allah uses the word mu'min in the verse. He doesn't use, for example, Muslim, or he doesn't use Ayyuhan Nas. He doesn't talk about the people in general. He's talking about the mu'min. So the question is asked that why is it that the believers are the brothers? Why is it not that the general community are brothers or the wider population are brothers of one another? Why is it that the believers have been specified in this verse? So the reason that is given by Ayatollah Subhani is that he says that, look, people that are of weaker faith, they unite on things that don't have like a strong foundation and a strong basis. So for example, if we were to unite on a political issue, or a maybe slightly lesser issue that we all unite on, we might be divided in another means by our enemy. So our enemy might attack us in another way. So for example, if you give an example, many people, many Muslims, they're ready to go out and protest against the occupation in Palestine for Quds Day. But the same Muslims that will turn up for that, they can easily be divided on the grounds of theology, or if you just put a bit of fitna in there, you can easily divide them. So the need for unity has to be established by the believers. And mu'min in the Quran, as you all know, there's a Surah Al-Mu'minun. The mu'min has a higher rank than the general believer. The mu'min is more pious and more God conscious. So it's therefore the duty of those individuals to establish unity on the basis of strong foundations. And these strong foundations, what are they? They're the belief and in the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example. We can unite on grounds like these. So there's a need for us to refer to the mu'minun when seeking unity amongst our brothers. And that's why, for example, in the recent controversy that happened in the community with the Lady of Heaven movie, we see that in the general population, the reaction sometimes can be inflammatory. People like to incite takfir and they want to, curse one another. But what did the mu'minun do? What did the believers do? And by the mu'minun, let's look at, for example, the statements of the scholars, the statement of the maraji. They were all condemning this movie as a means of creating takfir amongst the Muslims. So they were condemning it and trying to seek unity. So we need to look at the statements of these people. We need to look at, for example, the statements of the scholars that were in London, or, for example, in this institution where people tried to create unity amongst the Muslim community. Now, the second point that Ja'far Subhani talks about within this verse is that why is brotherhood important? What is the importance of brotherhood? So he says that by having unity amongst brothers, we're able to achieve loftier goals. We're able to achieve objectives that are beyond even this world. We can even obtain objectives that are for the benefit of the hereafter. So he gives, for example, an analogy. He says that, let's say, for example, rivers and streams, if you wanted to generate electricity from a river or a stream, it doesn't really produce much energy. But as soon as you divert all of these rivers into one dam and you allow these small streams of rivers to come into one body of water, you're able to generate enough electricity to generate power for towns and cities. This is the same with the community. As soon as we are divided in our small communities and we seek to have distance from one another, we can't really do anything. We can't have the ability to really impact change in a societal and a global level even. So we need to come together and unite on our commonalities. And this point bears a lot of resemblance with another point made by Mullah Faid Kashani in Al-Haqa'iq, which he talks about brotherhood and affection. And in this, he says that one form of brotherhood is that it makes the companionship between two people a means to get to a more beloved individual, or a means to get to a higher goal. So by having brotherhood, we can achieve a higher goal and an objective, which is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example. So now I want to link this to the previous khutbah. So when we spoke about the rights of the one that does evil to you, we saw that the right is to pardon them first and foremost. So imagine if, for example, someone that does evil to us, the right is to pardon them, then what is the right of the believer? What is the right of the fellow Muslim? By priority, they have even more right then for us to pardon them. We have to go even more beyond that. So, for example, again, we look at Mullah Mahdi Naqvi. By the way, his work, Jami al-Sa'adat, is relied upon a lot by the houses and the scholars because of his great attention to detail to ethics and morality. But within this work, again, he cites a prophetic tradition in which he says that the mu'min has 30 obligations toward his brother. Imagine that, 30 obligations. Not just one or two, 30. So just as you saw the right of the one who does evil has to pardon that individual, the right for the mu'min is now 30. There's 30 obligations. So what are those kind of obligations that we have? For example, we have to forgive his mistakes, or we have to guard his secrets, and we also have to visit him when sick and help to meet his needs. So we see that there's a wide range of things and obligations that we have upon our fellow believer. And finally now, I just wanted to highlight a few instances of the Prophet's life to conclude how he dealt with the Muslim Ummah and how he sought to unite the Muslim Ummah. So first of all, we all know the story of Aws and Khazraj, these two tribes that were at war with one another. But as soon as the Prophet comes along, he seeks to create a unity amongst the Aws and Khazraj, and they become brothers. And then furthermore, when we look at the Prophet's hijrah, he moves from Mecca to Medina. He goes on to hijrah to Medina. And when he's at Medina, the Muslims also follow him. So you have now Medina as this kind of melting pot of different Muslims. So you've got Muslims from Yemen, you've got Muslims from Habasha or Africa, for example. You've got Muslims from even Iran, like, for example, Salman. You've got Muslims from different places around the world. You've got Muslims that can't even speak the language, for example. They're all now together in one city. So what does the Prophet do? Because if, for example, we were to cause divisions on the basis of race, on the basis of language, then it could have easily been the case that the Prophet's community would have been divided easily just on these bases. But what does the Prophet do? The Prophet unites them on the basis of the faith that they have in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he seeks to make them into brothers of one another. So what does he do? He stands in Medina and he addresses all the Muslims and says that he makes them all the brothers of one another. So he pairs them into two and makes them as brothers of one another. And it's because of these actions that the Prophet undertook in his lifetime that his united ummah, his ummah of different races, of different languages, of different tribes came together under the banner of Islam. And it was because of this unity that the Prophet established that the Muslim ummah, a few years later, after the hijrah of the Prophet to Medina, they were able to have victory in Mecca. So we need to learn from the example of the life of the Holy Prophet and his household and how to deal with one another, how to deal with the believer and also the adversary in our lives. so that we may also have victory in this life and also in the next, inshallah. So we pray that we are able to take lesson from these words and not just speak them as lip service, but also put them into action. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. اللهم صل.
لا